In this video, I'll be talking about the cameras I've used, the ones I've collected, and my paintings of them. In 1993, I bought my first 35mm film camera. I had used other cameras before, but this one was serious. I use tons of photographic reference for my artwork, and I prefer to take my own pictures whenever I can. Before the days of digital, shooting on film was the only option, which for me sometimes meant that a roll of film might only get me 2 or 3 good pictures, but over the past 20 or so years, and after literally thousands of pictures, I've learned to take some pretty good ones. Paintings depend on it. So through necessity, I've become a pretty decent photographer, even though I don't consider myself one. I got a lot of use out of this Minolta, and the last time I used it was to shoot photo reference for my 12 painting series of local Prince Edward County farmers. And then I got my first digital SLR in 2012. The cost of film photography, combined with my novice-like understanding of f-stops and shutter speeds, made switching to digital SLR economical, convenient, and photographically certain. I can now see instantly if I'm getting the exposure that I want or need, and only have to print the photos I choose. I do post-processing in Photoshop, and I've since been composing a lot of images in Photoshop to use as the final photo reference. I still love the process and sophisticated yet low-tech nature of film photography, and the cameras of a certain era, much like cars of a certain era, have an aesthetic that still appeals greatly to me, and I'll be including them here and there in future paintings. This Instamatic was my family's main camera for about 2 decades, and this is me, probably mid-1972, judging by my size, playing with its big box in our first house in Toronto. This is an unretouched version of that photo. I love the little bonus photo of the wallet size you get when you went to this certain photo studio in Toronto, Chaz Able Photo Service. I acquired this camera in the mid-90s at a flea market when I thought, oh, I'm going to collect cameras. I never started collecting cameras. This is the only one of its kind that I have, but I have used it in tons and tons of paintings, this one being the only time it's featured all on its own. This is my first painting in which the Kodak Duoflex appears, and the only one in which it's being quote-unquote used rather than simply being held or sitting there. Using color to highlight the area where the camera appears and making the rest black and white was an experiment. It's kind of interesting and technically pretty good, but I'm not sure if it was altogether necessary. However, I do think the camera itself looks great, and it's clearly the star of the piece, so maybe the experiment worked after all. You decide. The title refers to my own use of a camera as the umbilical connection between me and the subject, which then filters back through me, via the resulting photograph, to the final painting. The word is written using charcoal and done during a brief period when I was writing on my paintings. I haven't done so in years. Here are some other paintings where I wrote all over them. This is one of my 26-part sunflower painting and is made up of 3 separate photographic elements. The background of the sunflowers, the model, and the still life in the foreground, which I composed using that Duoflex and a bunch of oranges. And this painting appears in the background of this painting. This is Aisha holding that Duoflex. For some reason I decided to change the color of her top from blue to white, I guess for a greater contrast, against the green background there. These 2 paintings were done concurrently in order to achieve a consistent look. They're also another example of me taking many subtly different photos during a photo session, and then deciding to make a series or a diptych or whatever based on the photos rather than one single painting. I was trying to work in a loose style here before returning to the controlled blending of my 20th anniversary painting. Obviously I preferred dramatic, slightly expressionistic lighting to flat, traditional lighting, and I think it managed pretty well during this shoot. The cameras came out quite nicely, and because of the lighting, become interesting focal points down at the bottoms rather than the more expected and perhaps more traditional focus being on the woman's face up at the tops. I deliberately wanted to keep the colors very limited here with Aisha holding the camera. I also did this in another painting with Ashley. I thought it would push me out of my comfort zone color-wise. It's effectively black and white, but the choice of using blue shadows and form with a bit of the blue and green underpainting showing through taught me quite a lot about restraint, color, and forcing me to see things differently. This monochromatic and white-heavy approach was also a bit of a test for a CD cover painting I was planning at the time, which turned out to be this. Here is the dearly departed Matt Osborne. This one is from my Tournament of Shadows series, where I've created a bunch of mysteries for the viewer to not necessarily solve, but to create their own narrative. I've included some points of interest, like the skeleton arm with a little bit of broken bone there, holding the camera. There's Ashley again, and this time she's got a tattoo on her shoulder. That's the alchemical symbol for to sublime. Here's an early shot as the colors are being applied, and here's another progressive shot. Since cameras are such an integral part of my painting process, I'll probably be including them in future paintings, whether it's the Kodak Duaflex or some other camera.